My name is Jennifer, and in my past 4 vlogs, I traveled down the California coast on my first ever solo road trip. This vlog is the final video in that series, so before we jump into the final day, I figured I'd do a quick recap for anyone that's new around here. The trip started at Half Moon Bay, just outside of San Francisco. From here, I made my way along the coast, making several unexpected but super scenic stops along the way. I ate lunch in Santa Cruz before ending my day in Monterey. The next day, I drove the scenic 17-mile road and stopped in a cute town called Carmel by the Sea, which I will definitely be revisiting. Then I headed out and hit the most anticipated section of the highway, Big Sur, and boy did it exceed my expectations. After the high of Big Sur, I thought I hit the highlight of the trip, but the next day probably ended up being my favorite day. The morning was centered around wildlife. I saw elephant seals and sea lions and more spectacular scenery. Then I made my way to San Luis Obispo, where I did a super scenic hike before making my way to the town for some exploring and a surprise market that had the best corn on the cob ever. This leads us to my last vlog, where I explored the town of Santa Barbara, another city that I will definitely be revisiting. Before embarking on an epic hike that included some sketchy climbs with amazing payouts. Okay, so here's where I would have jumped straight into the footage for today. However, unfortunately, I lost a decent chunk of the film for the vlog. Not sure how it happened, but it did. So my plan is to catch up quickly on what I did before jumping into the footage that I do have. And then my thought is I could do a quick reflection on how my first solo travel went. Some 3 pros, 3 cons. And of course, if you're not interested in the reflections, I'll be jumping right back into the fully filmed vlogs in the next one. So if you aren't subscribed, consider subscribing. Okay, so after the epic hike, I drove down to Los Angeles and met a friend for some lunch. After a quick tour of LA, we walked along Venice Beach, where I found out that as teenagers, he and his friends would buy a permit and play their instruments on the pier. After Venice Beach, we then went and grabbed a quick drink at a local bar that had a frat house theme to it, which was kind of fun, before parting ways. At this point, it was still early enough that I decided to go ahead and make the drive from Los Angeles to San Diego that day, so that I would have the next morning and afternoon to explore San Diego before my afternoon flight. So the next morning, I did a quick, short walk in this really cool area where you would have to walk between these like sand dunes or crevices. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of the hike because I put it in my notes while filming and I lost the footage. So if that sounds familiar, put the name of the hike in a comment below because I'd love to remember what hike I did. After the hike, I then made my way to La Jolla, where I actually have some footage. So we'll jump to the footage now.
Well, that was adorable. I love how there's just the baby seals all over the place. It was kind of sad how close you could get though. I was trying to stay enough away that I wouldn't wake them, but there were some people getting pretty close. So, you know, if you go, definitely try and give them their distance. This beach is just free for all. Too close. People too close. Well, yeah, that's why. Alright, conflicting thoughts after that second beach. I get that seals and humans have to adapt to living together, but there are some people getting super close to the seals and not giving them their space at all. Overall, this was a really cool experience though, but I'm a little conflicted on how I feel about the proximity. Also, I slipped on the poop rocks. So, I'm going to wash that now. People are swimming in that poop water. It's poop water. That's the better way. Before leaving La Jolle, I got a veggie juice. Now I'm at Sunset Cliffs, and I think I'm just going to relax here until I want to get some food before my flight tonight. There's some surfers, some cute cliffs. It's a nice way to end my trip. It's very relaxing.
And that was my first ever solo road trip. It was a lot of fun, and I hope that you enjoyed the videos. But as promised, I am going to now do a quick little reflections of how my first ever solo trip went. I thought I'd just do it real quickly with 3 pros and 3 cons. I'll start with pros. The first pro is obviously the ability to be super flexible. I was able to stay at each shop as long as I wanted and adapt the day to whatever I wanted to do. The second is probably either a pro or a con depending on your personality type, but because I was by myself, other solo travelers or other people felt more comfortable coming up to me and starting conversations, so that was kind of fun. And finally, the third pro was honestly just the challenge of it. I really had fun challenging myself. If any issues came up, I had to take care of them. All the planning I had to do on my own. It was just kind of nice to have a little bit of a challenge all on me and seeing how I was just with myself. When it comes to the cons, being an extrovert, for me, by day 3, I started to get a little bit lonely, especially considering road trip is not necessarily the right travel method for like making friends along the way and then traveling with them. The second con is kind of the other side of my challenge pro above. I had no one to share the burden with. So for example, I had a convertible this trip, and if you could tell in the footage, I never actually converted the convertible. I never took the top down. And I think I would have if Ray was there to help me figure it out. But since I was by myself, I was like, I don't want to try and figure it out. And finally, the third con would be that even though I did like the flexibility of the trip, normally when Ray and I are traveling together, there are 1 or 2 things that each of us kind of choose that the other wouldn't. So sometimes there's instances where Ray will say, hey, can we do this? And I'll be like, all right, fine. I would never have chosen it otherwise, but it'll end up being really, really, really fun. Sometimes even one of my favorite things. So I do feel like you miss out on those opportunities of having that second perspective added to your trip. But once again, hopefully you thought my trip was fun to watch and you thought my reflections were interesting. I'll be back to the normal vlogs starting in the next one, so thanks again for watching and I'll see you in the next one.